thank you all very much for coming tonight. We are, I'm Rabbi Devorah Lynn. I'm the co-founder with Mirala Goldstein of Mirala Goldsmith of Jewish Earth Alliance, and in 2019. And I'm in Berkeley, California, and she is in Washington, D.C. So we go coast to coast, and our network definitely goes coast to coast, very much so now. And we cover a lot of Congress, and our mission in life is to call on Congress to do something about climate change, to be accountable. And we always start our network meeting with an inspirational speaker. You can hear in my voice probably that I'm under the weather and I'm going to lose my voice very soon. But I'm going to start off this evening with our inspirational speaker, and then I'm going to hand off the mic. Tonight, Rabbi Robin Damsky, who lives in the North Carolina Research Triangle, is joining us. She studied for ordination at the Jewish Theological Seminary and the American Jewish University, and completed mindfulness and meditation teacher training at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, and that's where I know Robin. And she received her BFA in dance from Ohio University. Rabbi Robin created limitlessjudaism.com, and maybe we can put that link in the chat. And she is an innovator redefining Jewish life, blending spiritual practice with music, movement, neo-Hasidic text study, edible garden design, eco-social justice, and reverence for earth into a holistic expression of Judaism for the new century. Welcome, Rabbi Robin. Please start off our meeting and enlighten us.
Thank you, Rabbi Devorah. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm going to begin by just putting this in the chat because tonight's meeting is about public lands, and I want to honor that I am living on Eno land. I'm just outside of the triangle, as Rabbi Devorah mentioned. I'm in Efland, which is a rural area. My neighbors are cows and chickens and donkeys, etc. And I've been thinking about the land. I'm thinking all the more preciously about the land today as there are ice raids all over our community right now. They started in Charlotte 2 days ago, and they began in Raleigh and Durham today. So when I think about public lands, the earth, as Heschel said, the earth is the creator's and all that is within it. Let's take a breath on that just for a minute. We learn in Deuteronomy, actually, it might actually be Numbers, that the land is not ours to own. We are but sojourners here. And our work, your work, which I completely respect and am aligned with, is caring for this precious, precious planet that we have. In this week's Torah portion, we see Isaac and Rebekah and their issues over the digging of wells that Abraham had dug, and then back and forth between the sojourners and the people who were in the land before, and closing the wells up and reopening the land wells. Conflict. Conflict over who owns the land. So what I want to say is that we are all responsible for the land. We are all caretakers of and for the land and the water and the trees and the earth. And it is upon us to find that love, right? Which I imagine each of you has, which is why you're here. To find that love, to bring it into our own lives, and to share it. So there's the balance between activism and helping people to open their hearts and their bodies and their souls to remembering that they are Adamah. They are Adam from the Adamah. They're soil beings. We are all soil beings. So my blessing for us tonight is that we remember that we all share the land, that it is this incredible gift, this remarkable blessing that we have, and that has been entrusted to us in Genesis to take care of, and that we do it with grace and joy, strength when we have to, but compassion whenever possible. And may we succeed in caring for this beautiful, beautiful creation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We
Thank you
really
so much, Robin.
heard your blessing. And we're so glad that you were able to be with us this evening in a wonderful way to set us into our topic. But before we actually get to the formal part of our presentation, I'm going to invite our chair of Lobby Day, Dr. Phyllis Blumberg, to say just a word or two to us about the upcoming Lobby Day.
Hi, everyone. We had a really successful lobby day in July. We had more people, more states that we represented that we spoke to, more senators. Well, we're back again. Lobby day is February 3rd, 2026. We're hoping that all of you will join us. Registrations are going to be going out first, probably the beginning of December, so look for that. But right now, save the date, February 3rd. The Tu B'Shvat is the 2nd, so we're letting you celebrate Tu B'Shvat in any way that you wish to by eating all kinds of wonderful fruits and nuts, and then be ready for the next day to speak to the senators, aides, and we anticipate that we will have a great turnout this year, as well as the senators looking forward to talking to us because now we're a known entity. So I'm chairing again, and you'll be hearing a lot from me, I'm sure. And thank you so much for doing it last time. And thank you in advance for the future times.
Thank you, Phyllis. And we hope that everyone will not only join us this year, but also invite their friends and family to join us as well. I'd like to introduce our main speaker for the evening, Julian Reyes. He's had a career in the federal government working for the United States Department of Agriculture, Interior, and the State Department, and also the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Through Climate Hubs program, he has provided climate resources to farmers and ranchers and rural communities. And at the White House, he was an advocate for science and climate data. He has a bachelor's and PhD in civil engineering, and how he's managed to do all of that and still be so young is a wonderful gift that he has. We're so pleased to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to you today about the Department of the Interior. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about climate and climate change. I know that those are words that I typically do not use in my daily work. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about opportunities to engage on climate, even though those are things that are not currently important to the administration, but are obviously things important to us. And so I'm hoping that this presentation provides you context of how the Department of the Interior is currently operating, so that, for example, when you go and lobby, you provide some arguments that may resonate with some senators more so than others. And so I'm hopeful that can provide you some context of how the Department of the Interior is operating, and then some opportunities for engagement. And then I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And then Melanie, did you have my slides? Thank you.
Yeah.
And I know I have a few more slides than I promised, but I think they'll be helpful as visual aids and also a lot of important information. So I think you all know that the Department of the Interior, or I'll say DOI, that's a common acronym, is responsible for the management and conservation of the nation's natural resources and cultural heritage, and it plays a central role in overseeing public lands, upholding trust responsibilities to Indigenous communities, and ensuring environmental stewardship. The Interior Department was actually first stood up to take charge of the nation's internal affairs in 1849, and it was initially conceived as a home department to oversee a variety of internal affairs. And since then, DOI has evolved to become the nation's principal land management agency. We're charged with administering roughly 480 million acres of federal lands, 55 million acres of tribal lands, more than 700 million acres of subsurface minerals, and around 2.5 billion acres on the outer continental shelf. Next slide, please, Melanie. I also, this is actually not a joke, it's actually in our museum in the Department of the Interior. We're nicknamed the Department of Everything Else because of the broad and sometimes disconnected portfolio. So actually in its inception, DOI actually managed the General Land Office, which became the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM. They actually oversaw the Census Bureau. Funnily enough, they supervised the Patent Office, and they even managed the DC jail. So that's where they got their name, Department of Everything
Right.
Else. But within all the things that the DOI did and currently does, you can see the broad array of agency logos that you may be familiar with. So some bureaus or components of DOI you may be familiar with or have worked with include the U.S. Geological Survey, so the bottom left logo, and they're the principal science agency of DOI. They provide a myriad of physical and biological information for water resources, energy, mineral resources, natural hazards, core science systems, and ecosystems. Another important component is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're the principal federal agency tasked with conservation, protection, and restoration of fish, wildlife, and natural habitats across the United States and insular territories. And of course, you're very familiar with the National Park Service and other bureaus as well. So this slide, I do want to highlight relevant administration priorities so that you understand the language being used around conservation, energy development, and public lands. I know this might be a little upsetting because these are things that may not be what we want for our public lands. But again, it's helpful to frame arguments and concerns in this context. So I do want to highlight a few of these. So the first one is called Unleashing American Energy. And so EO means executive order. That came out earlier this year, and that unfortunately revoked a few previous executive orders from the last administration on climate change, including EO 14008, which was a major executive order that promulgated a lot of adaptation plans across the federal agencies and a lot of my own personal and professional work during the last administration. Another important work that a report that we are looking at is from the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ, and that is the Permitting Technology Action Plan that was released in May of 2025. And that outlines a comprehensive strategy to modernize federal environmental review and permitting processes. And that in particular is super important for the Bureau of Land Management because we permit a lot of uses on public lands. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I want to also highlight AI, artificial intelligence. That has been kind of a big thing at the Department of the Interior, especially with our secretary. And so I do want to highlight if there are opportunities to include AI in some of your language or how you're speaking with folks. That is one way that we are contextualizing a lot of our work, whether it used to be climate change, now it's maybe environmental change, contextualizing it within AI and how it's making us do our work faster, better, more innovative. That is one way of connecting with the current administration. I also wanted to highlight another executive order that is looking at permitting of data center infrastructure, especially for AI on federal lands. A project that we have with the U.S. Geological Survey is actually looking at the science and data needed to do such infrastructure work so that you're not building a data center where there's no water or no energy, right? We want to do it right and actually follow the science. And then the last administration priority I want to mention is restoring gold standard science. I have my own opinions about what gold standard science is, but I think understanding the tenets of how they're going about doing it is important. I will say that a lot of that work that focuses on basic science are things that we all can agree upon. One thing that is missing from that particular executive order actually is around science application. And so I think that could be an opportunity to kind of move this particular executive order forward in a place of kind of common ground. Next slide, please. So this is a super busy slide, but I think it's helpful in terms of how the Department of the Interior works. So, I came to the Department of the Interior from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and from other agencies. The DOI is very political in that there's a lot of bureaucracy in terms of telling us what to do. So at the Department of the Interior, we receive instruction on what to do with these executive orders through step-down policy implementation through secretarial orders. So each EO will essentially have an accompanying secretarial order with very specific things for bureaus and offices to do. So executive orders, are typically very broad. They just have kind of policy statements. These secretarial orders are very specific, and those are available on, if you just Google secretarial order DOI, you will see all the secretarial orders. And that is a great place to find agency actions that are happening or could be happening and ways to get involved or public comment periods or anticipate what could be happening. For example, under Unleashing American Energy, there were specific directives and guidance on rescinding the public lands rule. So, reading that when it first came out earlier this year would have given you a sense of these are the rules that they are getting rid of or will promulgate. Another thing that came out of that particular EO and secretarial order was revising the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, implementing procedures. So again, that gives people a sense of what is DOI going to do in response to that executive order and secretarial order. And I also mentioned other executive orders related to restoring gold standard science. So in that middle column, you see there's also an accompanying secretarial order. The column on the green, the green column just shows another secretarial order that has surprisingly withstood the test of time. That was actually produced from the first Trump administration on improving habitat quality on Western big game winter range and migration corridors. And that I highlight just as a secretarial order with language that you could use in some of the work that you do. And then you can see that secretarial order also kind of flows down to more BLM or bureau specific policies. So just examples for you all to see in terms of how we do our work, but also more importantly, the language being used in relevant policy documents. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the Bureau of Land Management, where I am situated. I was initially hired on over a year ago to stand up a climate adaptation program. That program no longer exists, but the people still exist, and we still do our work to ensure that there is relevant climate science and adaptation in all of the work that we do, even if that's sidelined. The BLM in general is the largest land management agency, not only in the nation, but actually in the world, which surprised me. So we manage over 245 million acres of public lands and 700 million acres of mineral estate. So we essentially manage around a tenth of the nation's surface area and a third of the nation's subsurface minerals.
Wow.
It's more than I expected. Yeah, so this map, so the yellow is BLM administered land and the brown is subsurface minerals, and there's some overlap, of course. And then most of the land we manage is out west, including most of our staff are out west, and that includes nearly 2/3 of Nevada and 40% of Utah, so it's quite significant. And a lot of these places are actually quite iconic. So that includes Grand Staircase Escalante in southern Utah. That includes actually Red Rock Canyon in near Las Vegas. They have a really great national conservation area. In addition to beautiful and iconic landscapes, the BLM we manage for multiple uses in our public lands. They also host Burning Man. If you did not know that there's actually an agreement between Burning Man and the BLM for them to use, I think it's Black Rock Desert in Nevada. So we do a lot of interesting things on BLM lands. I think the last fact I'll share is that the BLM also manages the over 10,000 rocks along the entire California coastline. So it's called the California Coastal National Monument. So that's another fun fact for you. I'll mention that our mission for the BLM is derived from the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, and I'll put this in the chat so you have that, or the acronym is FLPMA, F-L-P-M-A, and that's basically our organic act, right? It tells us how do we operate, and again, that establishes the agency's multiple use and sustained yield mandate to serve present and future generations, and you will see that everywhere, multiple use, sustained yield, present and future generations. And that is always the tension within BLM, the Department of the Interior, right? What does it mean to manage, conserve, protect lands for current and future generations? There's different ways of doing that, but we always come back to that mandate from FLPMA. I'll also mention some of the specific ways that Congress has mandated BLM of managing public lands. That includes energy development, livestock grazing, recreation, timber, but also while ensuring natural, cultural, and historic resources that are maintained for present and future use. Again, that tension of how do we do all these multiple uses, but again, preserving, conserving, managing the land for current and future generations. And it's very hard. I'll also mention the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, NEPA, which I mentioned. That's another foundational environmental law, not only for the United States, but for the BLM, because that helps us make decisions that affect the environment. And the core purpose of NEPA is to ensure that federal agencies consider environmental impacts of their actions before making decisions. Last slide, please, Melanie. So I do want to mention there are opportunities to engage with the BLM and with the federal government in general. The first is something called eplanning.blm.gov, and this is our BLM National NEPA Register. So I mentioned multiple use. So every use, every kind of lease or whatever happens on BLM land has to go through some sort of review process to see, can you actually do that? What are the environmental processes? And you can see all of that on ePlanning. And so, if you go to eplanning.blm.gov, you can see the active participation periods across the entire nation to see what is happening on BLM lands. And I highly recommend, if there is a particular thing happening near you, take a look. Do you agree, disagree? But that is part of what we need to do as citizens, to participate in the public comment process. So in particular, ePlanning provides public access to ongoing land use planning. And visitors can review and comment on plans, project documents, and then you can again see the active participation period. You can also see previous documents, and a lot of these documents are important in that they guide the use on public lands. And then the last one I'll mention is just regulations.gov. And again, I think you're very familiar with that, and that's a place to look at current rulemaking, and there are opportunities for public comment. So very recently, I think you all knew that the public comment period for the rescission of the public lands rule ended on Monday, and you all probably submitted comments. So I just highly recommend that you all kind of keep an eye out for other rulemakings coming out of either the BLM or the Department of the Interior or other agencies. And again, that is your way to get your voice heard on these important rulemakings happening. Those are all the slides I had. I just wanted to provide a brief overview of DOI and BLM, but also, open it up for Q&A and answer any questions that you may have. But also just, thank you again for having me. I just wanted to provide kind of the facts, I guess, in terms of how to engage with us, but also the language to use to, spur interesting conversations. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. There's a lot of alphabet soup in all this, and we hear people talking about NEPA all the time. So it's great that you've clarified that for us. I see some people with hand raised. I'd like to start with the questions in the chat. So if you don't mind putting your questions in the chat for right now, that would be great. And maybe we'll start. We've been doing some work in comment periods for the endangerment findings and so forth. How effective is that? How does the agency deal with those comments?
Good question.
Yeah, great question. I do want to say, someone said, I do want to know everything that I'm talking about is me as a person, as a concerned citizen, not in my professional role.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
So I'll speak from my own
Private.
experience and experiences. I am also currently working on a rulemaking. I will say that I think most of the time, I think the outcome is pretty settled. But I think by providing comments through the rulemaking process, a lot of that is made public, and agencies need to make sure that they at least respond to those, right, through the Administrative Procedures Act. And so even if the outcome is not kind of what you expect, even given public comments, like 90% say they want to do something else, you have that record through regulations.gov, and people will probably sue, if anything. So if anything, to your question, I think most likely it'll probably end up in litigation. But at least you provided evidence to the court.
Thank you. And we do appreciate that you're speaking for yourself this evening.
Thank you.
And
Sorry. Yes.
understand the sensitivity of that. We've had some questions about the threats that public lands face. There have been some suggestions by the president of things that he might do. I don't think they've become executive orders yet. To what extent can agencies stand up to provide their own perspective versus the executive orders?
You mean the agencies themselves?
Yeah.
That's a great question. A lot of the work actually doesn't even happen in DC, right? It actually happens out in the West for the Bureau of Land Management. A lot of the actions that happen are happening in field, district, state offices. If anything, some of them don't even understand there are executive orders, right? Because they're doing the job as a civil servant. So if anything, they are doing the job as stated in the mission of the BLM. And sometimes they don't even know that there are new executive orders. I think a lot of that happened when, for example, we had to remove environmental justice and equity and climate language from particular documents. And that's when they get wind of these types of kind of political, it's very jarring when administrations change. But I would actually say for some agencies, a lot of the work remains the same. For this administration, it has been a little more than just incremental changes. There has been dramatic changes, but I would say it's mostly policy people or headquarters people, kind of more coordinating at the top. But I would say at the field and district level, they are still doing the work that needs to be done based off of relevant laws. And no, the executive order may change language, but the work that they do is still following process and the law.
So I guess this is a follow-up. I see Amy asking, when the president issues an executive order to open land for oil, gas, or timber extraction, what recourse do citizens have to respond? And
That's
do
a great
governors
question.
play a particular role in that?
That's a great question. So what I know is that there have been a lot of kind of action plans to determine how best to do that. And even if that happens, I mentioned the e-planning register. So if there are, let's say there are opportunities for more oil and gas timber extraction, any use on public land still have to go through NEPA relevant laws, right? So the opportunity to comment on those actions would go through e-planning as an example. But you are right, though, that kind of the outcome is still that there will be opportunities already to open land, unfortunately. But do know that there are still dedicated public servants at the BLM that are making sure that we go by the book, right? That we're thinking about how we do this in a way that makes sense. And, to your point, if it does need to involve the public, then we do that.
We have a question about tribal lands. That's an important aspect of the Department of Interior, and there have been some Supreme Court cases that have given tribal leaders more control, at least in terms of the legal status. Does that affect the tribal lands as well?
Yeah, I haven't heard too much about that. I will say the BLM, we do have her title is National Tribal Liaison. I will say some of her work has actually been sidelined, unfortunately, during this administration. So I would actually say that's something to keep a watch on and to make sure that you hold the administration accountable. I think some of the things you're doing are unexpected, but I would say that we need to make sure that we're actually doing what we say that we would do and work, hand in hand with them. I personally am a little worried about that kind of co-stewardship that we should be doing with tribes in particular, especially with the public lands rule. And I would actually keep an eye on that.
I hear some, Nadine mentions the concerns that we've had about data centers. People are not really aware of the impact they have in terms of energy and water use, though we have seen a few communities now stand up and oppose them. Marian asked a question that may not be that diplomatic, so I'm going to try to soften it just a little bit. But are scientists continuing with research that perhaps does not jive with the president's priorities right now? Is that just those who've already left agencies, or can that be done within the agency itself?
So that research I mentioned on data centers, we're not promoting the use of or building data centers on public lands, but we want to provide the science and the data to support whether you want to do that or not. So that science continues in terms of if there are additional work to make sure that we have evidence-based decision making, especially around AI and data centers. That I can't say, right? Because I would say a lot of my colleagues who would have been great colleagues and work on this have left. So yeah, I guess yes, there's still opportunities to do the good science and the work to support policy, but I think a lot of those people who would have done the good work have left. And yes, to your point, I think without these kind of smart minds thinking ahead, like, oh, we should forward think, let's do science on that, I think it's going to be a lot of reactionary type science, unfortunately.
Yeah, we are very fortunate on our steering committee to have someone who formerly worked for the EPA. And we understand there's a whole group of people who formerly worked for the EPA who are banding together and doing good work. Robert has a question that may be outside of your area of expertise. Israel does a lot with water conservation and desalination. In the area of water management, do you know of any work with Israel?
I do not know actually. I slightly unrelated but related. A lot of the people who were in the international office at the Department of the Interior unfortunately have retired. And so there's not a lot of international engagement where there could have been, especially that kind of cross-pollination of ideas and knowledge, right? So that's kind of unfortunate. Loss of expertise.
It's what we're seeing in many agencies, and it's very difficult. You mentioned as you were talking ways of speaking with the new administration or with people who perhaps are not as committed to climate and the preservation of the environment. And that would be very useful to us because when we go out to lobby, we not only speak with Democrats, but we also do speak with Republicans. One thing we've found helpful is to talk with people who are hunters or who fish or who like trees. But perhaps you can give us some pointers of things that we can use as a way of bridging this area.
I think the last item you mentioned about working with hunters, fishermen, I think that's exactly one way. So I mentioned on one of my slides, I had that kind of big game migration corridor secretarial order. And that was exactly focused on hunters, fishermen. That was passed during the first Trump administration and has since survived. So that's that's a secretarial order at the Department of the Interior. And if you find that, I'll send the link. There's language words in there that I think you could use, right? Kind of it's more acceptable or appropriate to those types of people. I think thinking about innovation, I think that's another word that has come up in a lot of our work. How can we do things differently? We also hear the word efficient a lot. And so again, how can we be more efficient? And I think a lot of the things we've been doing is also how do we be consistent across the bureaus, the offices within the Department of the Interior. It's funny that a lot of the work that we do as people leave, we lose that consistency. People start asking why are different states doing things, and it's like, well, people have left. There are can't do any more policies, and so you can't run a government like that. So you lose that consistency. So it's a little kind of divergent, right? And so I think those are some ways to kind of find common ground. What are things that are practical, consistent to save money and be efficient across the board, but also thinking about connecting with those people closest to our natural resources who not only steward, but also live off of the land, but also take care of the land. And so that includes hunters and fishermen. And that, so definitely those are ways to connect more.
So we've seen the argument made that alternative sources of energy, non-fossil fuels, can be very energy efficient. They can be very inexpensive. Um, is that manifest within the agency as well?
We've seen a total, what's the right word? Wind and solar are being placed as non-viable sources of energy completely. There are various secretarial orders that basically call them, we've even, I don't even remember what the term is, but it's even worse than intermittent energy. Like they just don't want to be talked about at all, which is unfortunate. It's been probably the only kind of renewables that's acceptable, at least within the BLM, is geothermal, which, you know, quasi. But wind and solar, absolutely, it's like no one wants to talk about that. And even if we are trying to find another word for solar, wind, renewable, I think we use the word intermittent, which is also used on the BLM website, but those have been completely kind of sidelined. And if there are any current documents going through the pipeline under review on solar or wind, they're most likely not going to make it in terms of being accepted or even reviewed. They're kind of just completely sidelined.
Wow. The economic argument doesn't hold sway. That's really remarkable.
Yeah, if I can add another anecdote. So Kate McGregor is a new deputy secretary. And I read an interesting article that before she was approved again for her DepSec position, she was actually, I think, in Florida, and I think her title was something about like Vice President of Renewable Energy. And the article said it was a little ironic how she was a big proponent of wind and solar, especially in Florida, right? But now her new position is kind of totally against that. And so, yeah, if you do want to promote wind and solar. I think I agree they're very important. It's part of that all of the above strategy, but I think couch it within how Interior is viewing that energy strategy. And they don't use all of the above. They're definitely focused on coal, oil and gas, kind of the more extractive sources of energy, unfortunately. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that geothermal is the only one that sort of survived in the big,
that's
beautiful
right.
bill.
That's right.
Barack points out that in Norway, they're building their data centers underground, and that's
Oh.
much more efficient, and perhaps is something that the United States can learn about as well. We want to thank you so much for being so informative and also being brave to speak your own mind in the current climate. It's really important. So we applaud you for what you're doing. Yes, I see true applause happening out there, even though we can't hear it. And we hope to be able to support you in our giving comments and in our lobbying, which one of the issues that we're very much working towards is to somehow safeguard scientists and science in the government, because these are very real and important issues. In just a moment then, yes, they may be intermittent, but if you combine solar, wind, and batteries, they're pretty reliable. Yes, thank you. That's true, and we
I was
certainly,
in quotes.
yeah, we
So
certainly.
thank you so much, Julie. And Fred says hello. Fred
Thank you.
says his best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And then should I share my email or will
Sure, that would be
okay?
great.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah.
That'd be
You're
great.
open
And then
to
I'll
that.
stay on for maybe 5 minutes just to answer the chat, but I really appreciate the opportunity and you have very good questions. So thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
well,
this
we
is a good
appreciate
group.
it so much, and perhaps you'll see our action, and if you have ideas of how we can tweak it a little bit, that would be very welcome as well.
Absolutely.
I'm going to
Thank you.
introduce a member of our steering committee. I just need to find her picture. There's Judy. Okay, so I'm going to highlight her and ask her to unmute. And she's going to lead us in our action, which does relate to public lands and what we can do to safeguard them.
Hey, well, thank you to everyone. And you can put up my presentation. Maybe you already have. Okay, there we go. So thank you, Julian. That was very helpful. It's amazing to learn how much public land is out there that we all jointly own, and comforting also to know that it's there. So the public lands include national parks, national forests, and national wildlife refuges, and probably more that I'm missing out on, and we want to protect them because they are somewhat under threat with this administration. So next slide. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act calls for oil and gas leasing on federal lands, and the Trump administration is taking action to sell off some of our public lands. We get a lot of benefit from the lands we own for storing carbon to slow climate change, but also to contribute to the $862 billion recreation industry. Next slide.
It's a heritage that we pass on to the next generation.
Yeah. So the good news is that recently 2 senators, Tim Sheehy and Martin Heinrich from Montana and New Mexico, Sheehy a Republican and Heinrich a Democrat, they launched a bipartisan Senate stewardship caucus aiming to push back against the Trump administration's attack on the lands. And the goal of the caucus is to drive bipartisan efforts to protect and expand access to public lands. So we are taking action tonight to help grow that caucus, and we're going to be writing to our senators. You're mostly familiar faces here, but if you don't know how to find your senator's website, it's their last name .senate.gov, or you can call, here's the phone number. Oops,
that last bullet we can take out. We're not calling our representative because right now it's just a Senate caucus. But if you can go back. So here's oh, maybe not. It's okay, because this message. I had a short message on there for, but here's a longer message, and you can vary it. You can send it exactly like it is. You can, as long as you get the general idea across. So the sample message that I adapted from our action alert that's on our website, which is excellent, is I urge you to join the newly formed bipartisan Senate Stewardship Caucus and to find a partner from the other party to join with you. So in order to join the caucus, they want to keep it balanced, one Democrat, one Republican. So if your senator's a Democrat, ask them to find a Republican. If your senator's a Republican, ask them to find a Democrat. I am shocked by the administration's proposals to sell off or transfer millions of acres of public lands for mining, drilling, and logging. Short-sighted action is poised to undo generations of careful work to maintain habitat and ecosystems. As a Jew, you can write anything you want, but one idea is I realize we are but temporary inhabitants of the land, tenants rather than owners, obligated to treat Earth with reverence and responsibility. So I say we can work together. This doesn't have to be a one-party action. It's really something that Democrats and Republicans love our national parks, love hunting, fishing, enjoying the outdoors. So, and then lastly, ask your senator to get back to you and let you know, did he or she join? Did he or she find a partner to join with? So that's the message, right? So we're going to send it right now. So go to your senator's website, their last name, .senate.gov, and there'll be a place where it says contact, and you can submit a message. And we're putting all this text in the chat. So if you want to copy it from the chat, you can do that. But you could also leave it up on the screen. So if people want to look at it and study it.
Okay, so I think people can get to the chat even if I have the screen open. So
okay.
Feel free to copy that, but I'll put it back up. First of all, the way to contact. So if you'd rather write, then you want to go to the website. If you want to call and leave a message, it's after hours here in Washington, but most of the time your Senate offices will take a message.
And it's important. Thank you, Phyllis, for adding that information about who has joined so far. So we have Senators Heinrich and Sheehy, but we also have Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada, Tom Tillis, North Carolina, John Hickenlooper from Colorado, Steve Daines from Montana? Yes, Montana. Chris Coons from Delaware, and Katie Britt from Alabama. So if one of those are one of your senators, yes, please thank them for joining and get them to get their.
We invite you to just put a little message in the chat after you've either called or written a comment so that we know, and then we'll give everybody a few more minutes to work on this.
So Melanie, could you advance to the last slide of the, perfect.
Yeah, there we go. Nadine, yeah? You have a question you want to unmute?
It's not a bill, there's no bill number, it's a caucus. So you can ask them to please join the Senate Stewardship Caucus.
I'm with North Carolina. Do you know who it was that Senator Tillis paired up with?
I believe it is with Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada, but someone correct me if I'm wrong on that.
So are we supposed to suggest a senator for our other senator to pair up with, or it's
Well,
his obligation to find somebody that he thinks he could work with?
yeah, I think you should ask him, and you should tell him that his co-senator already signed up, which is wonderful. And wouldn't it be amazing if both senators from North Carolina were on this caucus?
Wouldn't that be amazing? That'd be a great Hanukkah present.
And as Phyllis points out, no, ignore my comment about contacting your representative. That was something left over from a previous meeting that I forgot to take out, that there is no similar caucus in the House.
I put a question in the chat. I didn't see the answer. Is there a bill number? Is this at the stage where it has a number? Like
No, I
Senate?
think you didn't hear me. I responded. This is
I'm
not a
sorry.
bill. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's called a caucus, and there isn't a number. We're just asking. This is a group of people who get together and discuss issues on how they can move things forward, but it's not a specific bill.
And so
Okay.
are we writing to our lawmakers to ask them to support the caucus? Is that what we're doing?
To join the
Asking them
caucus.
to
Join
join
the
the caucus.
Great, thank you.
I think it would be a great thing if North Carolina wants to lead the nation by being the first state to have both their senators in the caucus. That would be wonderful.
Well, it would be interesting. Watching what's going on in North Carolina is, I'm quite surprised and pleased to see that Tom Tillis is one of the initiators of this.
And I just put all the bullets in the chat. So if you want to copy and paste them from there, you can do that.
I think in the threat to offshore drilling, we found that Republican states are just as unhappy at the prospect as some of the more democratic states. So there's California on the one hand, but Florida also doesn't want to have offshore drilling, by their coasts. So people can be protective. All right, I'm watching the chat. So if you succeed and you're able to either leave a message or write something, do put a note in the chat that you've succeeded. All right, let's get Cory Booker on.
Thank you, Debbie.
All right. Pennsylvania is such an interesting situation right now. And I'm so jealous living here in DC that you have real senators who can really vote. So everyone is, okay. Thank you, James. We'll give it just a couple of more minutes.
It's a question about whether we should all in California contact Schiff and Padilla. The more, the better. The more contacts they get saying, will you do this? The more they're likely to listen to us.
Right, because remember, it's not just that they want to, but they also have to find a partner. So they might need a little oots because that's not always going to be so easy.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Elliot. Yeah, and as Debbie said, if you live in Colorado or Nevada or North Carolina, where we already have members, you can, or Montana, you can
Can thank them. Yeah.
Right.
Always a good thing if you wanted them to do it again.
Thank you, Carol.
All right, we're going to wait another 2 minutes. I don't want to take it down while people are still working.
So I'm looking to write another letter, and
Jean Halusik, my
they give it,
zip code is
sorry.
949.
They give a list of topics. Public lands isn't even in the list. What should I pick?
They have Department of Interior.
No,
What sounds like it's
You can
close?
always pick something like government affairs.
that's not even here. Government reform. Oh, there's other issues.
Yeah,
There you
Environment?
go.
that's always a good generic one.
It's just fascinating that nothing that would seem meaningful in this context is one of their topics, which I think is indicative.
Do
Yes.
they have environment?
Environmental. Okay, good. I'll go with that. Thank you.
Unfortunately, with a lot of other issues on the plate, environmental issues have slipped
Right.
down for some. All right, I'm gonna close the share, but everything is still available in the chat. So if you're still working on this, you should be able to find everything that you need. You may have to scroll up a little bit, or maybe Judy, you want to put it in one more time down below. I want to take just a minute to thank everyone for their help with this briefing tonight. I want to thank Rabbi Robin Damsky, who set a tone for us and reminded us of the responsibility that we have as tenant farmers, as those who are shomer chinam, who are guardians of God's creation. I want to thank Julian Reyes, who spoke to us from his heart and from his concerns, and from the depth of the issues that are before us. I want to thank Rabbi Dvorah, who came on even ill, Phyllis and Judy, members of our steering committee. And I want to close with just a little bit about Thanksgiving. We are looking forward next week to Thanksgiving, and maybe you're spending that with your family of origin, or the family that you've created for yourselves. Sometimes that gathering with family can be totally wonderful, and sometimes those gatherings can be a little bit complicated, but we know that they're very important to us in either case. It's also interesting that Thanksgiving is a holiday where food is really very central, and that can remind us of the importance of the earth which sustains us. My husband's family has produced a Thanksgiving Haggadah. It is as long as the Passover Haggadah and includes many speeches that are part of American history. But I thought I would share with you just a short kavanah that you might consider as we sit down to eat on Thanksgiving. So this is a prayer that was written by Rabbi Deborah Smith, and it seemed to me a good kavanah for the Thanksgiving dinner. Source of all, we thank you for your plentiful offerings, for the treasures of healthy sustenance which we enjoy today as all days. Grant us the wisdom to make healthy choices. Help us to find balance in our lives. Help us to nurture our bodies and our spirits, so that we may serve you and all creation in love. And if you'd like to join me and say amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you all for coming this evening. We're going to have a lot of fun next month for December. We're going to begin with a little Hanukkah celebration with music and light. It's going to have to be bring your own donuts, though we apologize, we're not able to provide those online. And then we have a speaker on laughtivism. Maybe what the environmental movement needs is a little more humor to bring people over to our side. So we thought that would be very appropriate for Hanukkah. So I hope you will all join us in December, and we'll talk also about renewable energy, since renewable energy is what the Hanukkah is all about. You've seen the picture. It goes right into those olive trees, getting its energy naturally. So thank you so much, and everyone have a great Thanksgiving.